wanted to ask you, your role, what do you... Are you good? Are you good? All right. Good afternoon, my name is Octavius Pukubia. I'm the MD of Idea Value Added Services. It really is a pleasure to be here to moderate this conversation. I've got a very solid team that I'm going to be engaging with, hoping that we get some progress, some solutions, some ideas of how we solve and position and really progress our work in the township, economically speaking. So let me take this chance to introduce the panel. We're joined by the District Mayor of Ngakamudiri in Northwest, Justice Mukulumakwa. And we're also just joined by online. I think we've got Tulu Mukaula, the President of South African Institute of Black Property Practitioners. He should be online. We are also joined by the former MMC of Economic Planning and Development at City of Johannesburg, Councillor Thapelo Ahmad. And on the stage, we're joined by the Councillor of Ward 11. This is Councillor Olani Mdagazi. And we've got online Dr. Ntabiseng Muleko, the development economist from the Stellenbosch University Business School. Is she online? Can I get a note or a sign that she is online? She's joining us for this conversation. I was also meant to have Tulani, the founder of Five Star. Can I get some assistance on whether he is online or he is coming to join us on the stage? Well, let's kick off the conversation. So early in the morning, we had Professor Padi starting off and giving us a good sense of what we should be looking at when we are thinking about developing our economies. We also followed that up with the panel that my colleague from Maya Capital moderated, where again, the regulators really commented and lamented about what other mechanisms were being put in place to really fast check and accelerate the development of the township economy. We're continuing with our conversation, and really we are looking to find solutions and understand at a local level what are the responses in terms of whether operatively building other lasting is questioning ourselves whether there are solutions or not. So I want to kick off this conversation with the former MMC for Economic Planning and Development at COJ, Councillor Thapelo Ahmad. And I'm not too sure, even in the first imbizo, if this question was answered. But the assumption that we understand what a developed township looks like, it's something that we need to pay careful attention to. So as somebody who just paint a picture for us, what is this perfect scenario that we're trying to build towards? What is a developed township economy? So that we can flip back and say, what are we now doing to get there?
Thank you very much. Am I audible? Am I audible? Okay. So, it's a very interesting question, in the sense that if one grows in Tembisa, for argument's sake, and a township, the first thing that we need to do is to disrupt the spatial injustice. Because we need to understand how were townships built during apartheid and the representation of the township, which is inherent representation in an apartheid system. So people were taken and placed in the peripheries of the cities where opportunities are likely to be found. A city such as, back in the days, COJ, the City of Johannesburg. For Nano, we talk the future city, which is like the presidential project that is likely to come. Here in Midrand, Mall of Africa, Mall of Africa. So the disruption that we are likely to it's not a disruption where we need to go out on rails or maybe loot or vandalize the infrastructure. But we need to understand where everything commences from planning point of view. And what are the chances, a child who grows in a township, for them to see the light at the end of the tunnel, which is access to opportunities. So the infrastructure itself dictates the future of a child who grows in certain conditions. So we need to create an agile environment from the transport point of view, because the transport contributes directly on the economy of the country or any other country. Because the model that we are using, is it really conducive, or are we perpetually contributing or working onto the footprint of what I highlighted as apartheid? So if you have a child who's in Soweto, and the child is born there, every day when that child wakes up in the morning and they are looking at the four walls of their house, it's a constant reminder. In as much as we might say, no, we can't speak apartheid beyond, over and above 94, but it's a constant reminder of apartheid and its representation, because we are subjected to the very same conditions our forefathers were subjected on, for as long as you are residing in those environments. So this is where we come in from the planning point of view, to disrupt that system and create an agile environment where you need to have a mixed model and foster social cohesion from both infrastructure point of view and from the inhabitants of that particular infrastructure. When we were sworn into the department, we embarked on a campaign called Taking Development Planning to the People. Because Rona, our people, particularly black ethnic group, we do not understand the importance of planning from the infrastructure point of view, because it does really dictate who you are. So taking that development planning to the people, it was for us to educate the people for it. We also need to have aspirant planners as black ethnic groups. It also speaks into contributing directly into the GDP. Yeah, can I talk a lot more for now, and then I'll elaborate later. Thank you.
Thanks, Tapelo. It's quite clear that for us to begin to see a brighter future in terms of our township economy, there's a great deal of development change or perspective that needs to confront us. And I want to bring you, Ntabi Singh, into this conversation and say, as government, do we find that there is enough rethinking of how we are building and structuring our economies at a local level? What are some of the learnings we have seen in other countries, if there are any examples, that can begin to provide us with some level of inspiration, academically speaking, to say it is possible? These are the 5 or 7, 8 things that needs to be done. What, in your perspective, in your areas of work, have you seen to be the work that government can begin to think about, how we build this future that Tapelo is talking about? Do you have Ntabi Singh on the line? Is Ntabi Singh on the line? Okay, looks like we've had a glitch there with Ntabi Singh. We'll bring you back to that conversation. The government has got a role. It's clear, right? It's fairly straightforward. But South Africa has got districts and municipalities that differ in characteristics. We've had earlier the city of Johannesburg, more resourced municipality, We then have Ngakamudiri, for example. What in your area, because you've got a mix of township and rural, what in your area do you feel that there are practical solutions that can work in addressing the need to develop the township in the different characteristics that it has? You know, if a Soweto compared to a township in Ngakamudiri municipality, are they the same, and what works there? Justice?
Okay, no, thanks, Octavius. Let me take this opportunity to greet everybody present. No, thanks, Octavius. Let me take this opportunity to greet everybody present in this in Bizo, and really I appreciate the invitation. I was informed, I think it's yesterday, but I immediately accept the invitation because it's very key. It's that time really more focus on economic development. So I had to leave other arrangements that were already there, already in place for me to attend to. But generally where I come from, it's more of a rural, 70% rural, 30% peri-urban and urban. So, but generally we are trying as a district municipality. We know we are approaching the issue of district development model, where the district is going to be the center to coordinate all municipalities that are reporting directly to district. So there are regulations. We are also contributing towards regulations and policies and laws that are affecting on economic development, especially issue of township. We've got an MEC of the province. That's where we are having meetings and we are taking inputs from our entrepreneurial personnel or from people who are representing enterprises from our areas. Then we are taking those inputs. We are trying to inform regulations and guidelines. I think MEC was here earlier on. They have said that they have tabled regulations. Even where I come from, the MEC has been involved in trying to get the inputs. But generally, in terms of township development, it must start with us. We are trying our level best. So when we are doing maybe conferences or when we are doing meetings, we are trying to target accommodations that are in the township. That's the direction we are trying to push. If you can go around our district, we are even encouraging the departments, the provincial departments and national departments, to also make sure that they are using the township accommodations, transport, and so on. So that's what we are trying to influence within our district. But as I've alluded to, we are also informed we've got some very urban or some. I'm coming from a town called Medley. I think this is the capital city of the Northwest. If you can go there now, we have influenced. There are a lot of areas or places that are used by government that were not used before, like guest houses. They are now in peri-urban township. They are well developed. So we are trying our level best to influence them. Then we are also, as government, there is this issue of 30%. Really, we are trying that our entrepreneurs must be coming from township and from rural areas. So that's what we are trying to. That's how we are trying to influence in terms of township economy. Our province, the Department of Economic Development in the province, they've been assisting tuck shops, transport, people, tourism sectors, really as a district, because we are doing coordination and involved in all that coordination. We are monitoring, we are checking implementation that is done by the province. Where I'm sitting, I know, especially around where I think where the president, if you can go there, I can, from where she started primary school, if you can go there, I can, when plus or minus close to 5 tuck shops that I know were funded by province through the coordination of the district and municipality, the local municipality involvement. So, on economic development, thank you, PDS.
Thank you so much, Bra Justice, for that. Also, a history lesson, the president of ABSIP, we must find out this about the status of the school. If it's not in good condition, she must adopt it and start supporting it. But I want to then take this conversation to you, Bam Degas, that the discussion around infrastructure in our communities, the discussions around different sectors being developed, the different programs or mechanisms that government and private sector, come to invest in the community. On the ground, do we see the difference? And what are the gaps? Is the community fully involved in taking ownership of all these things that are happening around and for them?
Thank you, from the program director. Let me greet all the people here. Program director, I'm representing the community. I think everybody else was here to answer most of the questions. And I'm going to answer the one that involves my word.
Yeah.
Yes. The things we should be done, it should be done. I think it should be the mindset of the people to change. The first thing. The other thing, we're talking about the township economy. But the community, what we're talking about, is not involved. We're using, most of the time, the foreign language instead of using our languages, indigenous languages, so that our people should understand what we're talking about. We take business as a thing that is very difficult. But if you ever think by what you call it, ancient years, our people, they used to do things by their own. But in these days, it's only the foreign nationals who are taking over our economy. Because we just talk up there in the national province, but we don't call the resource to educate our people. I think education is very key. If we can call the resource, we come to the people and we explain how to start a business. Because most of the people, they don't know or understand how to start a business. And now we talk about township economy. How will we do this township economy without involving our people or our community? Like today, most of us, we get the invitation late. Even if the small businesses are around this what, they just get it today. So they should be here so that when they see the minister here, to explain them to them so that they can understand. So they didn't get anything, but we're just here. So if you can try to think this is the way we can start doing justice to South African people or township people so that they can understand. And then we make workshops around in my ward that are owned by foreign nationals, plaza shops. That's why the people, they went to doing looting. They loot to those plaza shops because they're owned by the foreigners, not by the South Africans. So I think this is the mistake we have got as a government to be involved or to make the people to be involved in this stream of business. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Xolani. Really appreciate that. There was a DG of Small Business Development earlier in the first panel, Mlindo Kuhle. So I think without stealing the thunder from Mr. Mdagazi, there is an opportunity for CEDA as an agency of government and specifically Department of Small Business Development to partner with the communities to make this knowledge and access to information a lot more better. I think there is an opportunity to what Mr. Mdagazi is saying. Let me segue at this point to you, Dr. Ntabi Singh. Really, just bringing in there's a lot of this discussion that is taking place currently across the country, and as we are doing so as ABSIP, to really center how we move forward as a country. How do we rebuild? How do we ensure that this doesn't happen anymore, or it doesn't happen again, or the risk of it is managed? In your view, are we even thinking about this thing adequately or appropriately? Are there any lessons that we could rely on from other parts of the world, academically speaking? Is there a way that when we think about township economy development, we need, specifically as South Africa, need to consider? Do we still have Dr. Ntabi Singh?
Thank you
I
so
can
much
see on
for
the
having
screen.
me.
I'm not sure if actually. Okay, great. Go for it.
All right, thank you. A very good afternoon. Thank you to ABSIP for the invitation, and very good afternoon to my fellow panelists and also to the esteemed guests and community of Gauteng who are present today. I think let's start from the beginning. The township economy, from a numerical perspective, the population, we are talking about 11.6 million people in South Africa, or approximately a quarter of South Africans who are living in the 76 townships that are in South Africa today. This is a significant chunk of our people. And the economies of scale, when you're talking about this quantum of the value, one of the key sectors that has seen the opportunity for the more than 11 million South Africans that are living in townships is the fast-moving consumer goods subsector that is valued at approximately 563 billion. So we're talking about a population of South Africa who are serviced by different consumer goods companies, different subsectors of the economy who understand that there is a market. We all know that there is a market. This is undoubtedly one of the fundamental facts. The other thing we've got to understand is that the size and the scale of the informal sector is also quite significant at approximately 160 billion. So combined, these two are approximately $1 trillion, 720 billion per annum, the value. And the question we must ask ourselves as South Africans is, where is this money going? Where is this 720 billion going? And I did a little bit of research in answering this so that I can posture myself for the discussion and understand, having listened to some of the inputs this morning, but also where we are going and how we can answer some of the questions that the program director has asked me to say, what can be done going forward? We've got to understand what are the most utilized goods, services, or products within our local economies. And I don't want us to differentiate primarily township from the formal economy. Our economy is made up of South Africans, and we should, as South Africans, contribute to all economic activity, whether it's the formal sector, whether it's in rural areas, township economy, suburbs, wherever, but our products should primarily be benefiting South Africans in terms of that value chain. I want to go to the second question I asked. So this more than 11 million South African population, this almost 720 billion value in terms of approximate size that we are seeing going to certain companies. What are these consumer products? What are these goods? So I looked at some of the goods that are very much utilized and some of the very popular goods that are used in the townships, and they call them brand or high level of brand goods that are more. I'm not in the marketing space, but they have high brand value. I'll use that terminology. Taxis is one. There's an entire value chain when you're talking about taxis. Let's talk about the finance. Let's talk about the value chain that is utilizing the whole value chain within the transport industry. Of that, how much is used and supporting local goods, services, and products in terms of the taxi value chain? Let's go to some of the fast-moving consumer goods. Coca-Cola is identified as one of the most popular brands, one of the most consumed goods and products. Next in the list is Kentucky Fried Chicken. So some of the fast food outlets where we consume food are also using a big proportion, and I go to what we call disposable income. So a large proportion of the income that households have goes to food and food products. We know that the lower income deciles, they spend a greater proportion of their income on food and living. And so you've got to understand that if we are trying to improve the local, I'd say, human living standards, we've got to understand where is the bulk of the income of our people going, right? The other goods that are mentioned are kiwi, which is a shoe polish. So you're talking about some of these chemical products. You're looking at koo beans. These are tinned products, right? Maheu is another one. Who is making maheu in your local community? We know that it's one of the #1 products, and I'm going to talk to this as well. We know that a ShopRite, which is one of the retail markets, is one of the more utilized. So there is a list of goods and services that are generally known as more popular, that are highly consumed, that contribute to that 563 billion of the formal goods that are traded within the fast-moving consumer goods sector. Lucky Star is another one. All Gold is another one. Tomato sauce. We're talking about Dettol and milk. Now, if you break these down, the next question that you've got to ask yourself is who makes these products? Who makes these products, and are they processed locally? Where are these production nodes? If we are going to begin to try and change the economic outcomes of South Africa, we've got 76 townships that are serviced by these products, including the formal or the suburbs and outside of township. But who is making these products and where? So I did a little bit more research and analysis, and I looked not at all of them, and I won't go into it because of time. But if you look at, for an example, Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola is one of the companies that is basically providing, whether it's Fanta or Coke products and others in your local communities, which many of us consume. It's owned by a family, which is now merged with SAB Miller. That's a public company. The second is KFC, which is a franchisee, but one example which many of our household income is going into. Who owns? So we know that in South Africa, there are about 960 KFC outlets. These can be individually owned as franchisees and so forth. But the question that you want to ask is there a localization of inputs, right? So the most basic input for Kentucky is chicken. Where is the chicken coming from? I did more research, and when you look at it, you see that the input is coming from a large proportion rainbow chicken, which is one of the primary sources of the chicken that goes into Kentucky. And you'd find if you look at Chicken Licken and other manufacturers or other franchisees, they have oligopolies or big multinationals that are primary sources of the meat. It doesn't necessarily come from local inputs, right? So the footprint in every township, whether you go to some of the biggest consumed brands or some of the franchises that are consumed in the township, there's very little localization. You go further. Who else supplies chicken to Rainbow? AFGRI, which is the agricultural subsidiary in South Africa, which has a poultry line, and this is in 2012 where they begin to supply. So it's big business, right? It's big business that usually gets these supply chain deals. They're not called tenders in the private sector, but it's supply chain deals. And big business is usually the beneficiary of these. Rainbow was founded by an individual named Stanley Methven, who later then formed the RCL, which is a consumer goods company which supplies foods to various companies. And it's struggling right now. If you look at current trade policy, which enables dumping, the poultry industry has significantly had significant difficulties because of dumping coming in from different emerging markets, which I won't target, but emerging markets are also competing for this very market. So the very chicken that was now produced locally by oligopolies or multinationals is now also competing with cheap imports, right, that are coming in from outside. So our township SMMEs are not only competing with multinationals, but they're now also competing with cheaper imports, primarily from Brazil and China, and existing oligopolies, which are South African-owned companies that are also further squeezing us out. So I think we've got to understand the context within which SMMEs are trying to operate. The last one I want to talk to a little bit is the food processing. Look at the food that is in your households. Look at the food that you buy, even in the spaza shops. How many of those products, for an example, Ace, Emily Meal, for an example, the mayonnaise, cross and blackwool that many of you use, Oros, how many local businesses are in the food processing business, right? We know that these brands that I've just mentioned are owned by one company, Tiger Brands. So you again seeing that within the food processing company or the food processing value chain, many of our products are controlled by, again, a few companies that process and manufacture these brands that we all love and consume. So what then can be done? How can SMMEs enter into an oligopolist economy, into an oligopolist industrial sector, an oligopolist retail food sector? We heard earlier on from the Competition Commission that the exclusive lease agreements also squeeze out SMMEs in the malls where all these products are sold. So you can't even get into the very malls because of the cost, but also the exclusive lease agreements disable your SMMEs. So you've got to look at policy imperatives that enforce at a local level. And this is where your local municipal bylaws are critical. The functioning of the state is critical. The enablement of local entrepreneurship to enter into these spaces becomes crucial. Space has got to be made from a legislative perspective, because we have seen from the last 25 years, it doesn't happen by choice. If you don't enforce it, it's not going to happen. So what can be done practically? We've got to localize production of inputs. We cannot continue to have an oligopoly-driven economy. We've got to have, whether you're looking at provincial regions, basic foodstuffs, whether you're looking at Millie Mill, rice, Black Cat, peanut butter, any type of a product which is consumed locally, you've got to have a significant proportion of that manufactured, processed locally. You've got to localize supply chain unreservedly. This can be done, but you've got to work with the supply chain networks of these oligopolies that currently control 96% of your food market. So if you look at the SPAR group, the ShopRite, Checkers, Pick and Pay alone, they control 82% of the value chain, or the market share currently of your what they call the supermarkets. So this is where most of you are getting your food, but most of the supply chains there need to be broken down. And I can allow for more discussion later on what needs to be done in supply chains to actually open up localization. But the critical thing is, where will the money come from? And this is the question that I don't know was answered earlier today. If we don't answer the question of finance and how we can finance these local SMMEs to begin to have a market, we are going to be stuck where we are. And I think one of the solutions lies very much in the 197 billion that is annually given to Department of Social Development. Social development is given from the budget through the state fiscus, through the medium-term budget policy statement, through the budget annually by the Minister of Finance, an approximate 200 billion. Most of this money is used for household disposable income transferred directly to food and foodstuffs. If we were to begin to organize government and have a voucher system, remember 83 billion of the old age pension, I can talk about rural areas, 83 billion that goes to old age pension, the majority of those pensioners are using it for food. They go straight to ShopRite. They go straight to Boxer. They go straight to, and Boxer is owned by Pick and Pay. It's part of that 82% market value that is controlled by 3 companies. That's why I'm talking about oligopolies that control our value chains and market access. 70 billion is for child support and 24 billion for disability grants. Most of this money is for food. If we can create a simple system of vouchers that are targeted at local SMMEs across our provinces, you've immediately got a source of direct market access for those companies. They immediately have 197 billion every year from which can be directed from the oligopolies to directly SMMEs at a local level, township, rural, and other towns which may be more developed. But where does then that money go? It goes into SMMEs. They can then employ locals. We can start to deal with this issue of inequality, lack of market access, lack of ability to have entry into the economy by our SMMEs. We have a market. The last thing on the finance, the NEF must be recapitalized. The National Empowerment Fund has got to be recapitalized to focus on agri-processing and large-scale agro-industrialization as a way for us to get out of the quagmire we are in quickly. The NEF has been struggling to be recapitalized for the last 5 years. I know because I used to be one of the trustees in the NEF. We've got to look at a facility that enables the NEF to finance beneficiaries at prime minus. This is crucial. The structuring of any finance that goes into the NEF must be cheaper than banks, must be cheaper than current commercial facilities and finance, and enable the financing by the NEF so that beneficiaries are not funding also the interest to greater degrees of paying and servicing interest at a higher level than they would if they actually got it from banks or commercial banks. So I'm saying that there is a solution. We don't need more money. The NEF can be helped by institutions like the PIC. And this finance shouldn't go directly to SMMEs. The NEF has a balance sheet, has systems, processes. So you've already got costs and a cost model that is funded, but you've got to now reach a bigger proportion of SMMEs. And for you to enable that, you've got to have a facility that targets small and micro, that targets agri-processing, and that enables those beneficiaries to actually enter into the system. I think I'll stop there, but you've got to have targets.
Thank you so much. All right, thank you so much, Dr. Ntayumuleko. You have dropped so many gems here. I hope the audience that is also watching us online is feverishly tweeting. So, and I think the recordings of this session will be there. Some very important points that you are bringing up. And I see Ntate Mkaula is nodding there in agreement. And I want to ask you, Ntate Mkaula, so there's a question around, let's create all the set-asides, allow SMEs to get involved in the entire value chain, whether it's FMCG, but I want to go even into property, of the malls that are there, roads that are being built. In your view, have you guys come to the party and small businesses? And I think we had a discussion on the sidelines of this panel. Are you guys coming to the party? And if you are coming to the party, what seems to be the gaps? What are the areas that seems to be unaddressed, that we continue to say SMEs are not being given or are not afforded enough chance for them to participate in this entire value chain? Dr. Mkaula?
Thank you very much, Octavius. And I think Dr. Ntabizane really has kind of summed up the majority of a lot of the thoughts that I had. Look, for starters, what we've as property practitioners always been advocates of is we need to be very careful in terms of how we define what it is that we're talking about. So the idea of a township economy, I then question, do we have a township economy, and then what do we call what's outside of a township economy? I think I liked what Dr. Ntabizane spoke about a formal and an informal economy, rather, because what we need to acknowledge is the fact that a lot of what we're dealing with is a spatial problem. We cannot take away the effects that apartheid spatial planning has had on the current problem that we have. And I think in terms of looking for solutions, that really is a philosophical question that needs to be answered. And I think in terms of trying to answer that, what we've tried to look at is the idea inclusivity. So inclusivity in terms of the value chain. I mean, Dr. Ntabiseni spoke very eloquently to the idea of an economy where you look at of consumerism, production, and distribution. These are all value chains. And the issue currently is that capital is very extractive in its nature when they invest, or what they call investment, in townships. So unfortunately, they don't recognize the value of our people as being consumers, as being producers, and as being distributors. I mean, if you look at that entire value chain, I mean, I can give you the example of consumerism, where you need to ensure that what you're creating is reflective of the community that you're operating in. In consumerism, for example, in Jewish communities, you get kosher food. In Muslim communities, you get halal food. What do we get in our townships? In terms of production, when you look at the retail sector, production is not, and unfortunately townships are seen as enclaves for labor. So what degree are we saying that a specific proportion of what's being produced in townships actually comes from that kind of local community? So shelf space, in our view, is something which is very important, especially when you're looking at the retail sector. And then the distribution networks. If you have a distribution value, if you have a production or a distribution value chain that emulates from a suburban area, it completely defeats the purpose of trying to build the idea of a township economy. And so we come to the idea of looking for solutions, specifically in from property practitioners. I think we've always felt that ownership is very important. I mean, one of our key stumbling blocks has always been access to finance. And unfortunately, we need to ensure, so when you look at property, I think there's two aspects that we need to look at. We need to look at the issuing of development rights, when those development rights are issued to people who come from out of communities, and those development rights must be contingent to Black participation. I think in terms of the policies that we currently have, we very apologetic in terms of being very pro-Black and pro the communities that those policies seek to defend or seek to empower. So I think from a policy perspective, in terms of issuing those development rights, it's very important to ensure that Black participation, which in essence, in terms of that entire value chain, and if you look at from property ownership down through the entire property value chain, whether it's your consultants, whether it's your contractors, we feel that would then have a high impact. And then the issuing of funding. We also feel that there's a great opportunity for funding institutions to also make funding contingent on social cohesive interventions. So when you are issuing funding, it must be a requirement for these developers or landlords who are coming into our townships to also invest, and it must be on infrastructure. And we're not talking about CSI, because I think for the most part, there seem to be these the idea that you can kind of create these little CSI initiatives which don't really go down to the heart of involving entire communities in the entire value chain. So I think really ownership for us is very important in that regard. And in terms of us coming to the party, I mean, look, we do engage with various elements of government, various structures of government, and I think this gesture through ABSIP, by acknowledging the fact that we shouldn't see ourselves as pillars that stand independently, that there's a lot of cross-pollination in terms of solutions that we can give to each other in terms of resolving some of these problems. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Mr. Kaula. Again, the theme around how do we maximize the true value of the entire chain. How do we get small businesses involved from production? How do we get small businesses involved in the distribution of this products in the shelf space in retail? You mentioned the development rights when it comes to infrastructure, which is very, very, very crucial. From again the discussion that have taken place. So I want to bring you in here, Thapelo, as a former MMC. The question around spatial planning has always kind of come up to say, but government will continue to roll out roll out, this infrastructural projects using, the old spatial planning methodologies across the board. And maybe Gauteng is unique. Maybe Gauteng is beginning to say, let's rethink it, right? But at a government level, as that is taking place, you have this embedded, companies that are involved in infrastructure projects. How do you balance, right? How do you balance the need for us to rethink how we do our spatial planning, whereas also you are involving small businesses in this entire sector that can deliver on this new thinking that you are currently having? How do you balance the two? Do we have the mic? Is it gone?
Sorry, I'd like to check in. So, let me contextualize it from the space that I'm operating in, right? Which is the city of Johannesburg. From the government point of view, the city of Johannesburg is governed by coalition partners. So we call it government of local unity. So we have 10 key priorities that are representing the government of local unity. But the late executive mayor introduced the Joburg 10 plus, which is among the other, you add other priorities where you can rethink or because if you look at the Pastille analysis, the first component of the Pastille is the politics.
Politics, yeah.
The daily politics, right? So politics influences your livelihood. So we, from planning point of view, are bringing a campaign that says politics reimagined, right? So we have we call it a mutual co-production from the government point of view. The mutual co-production would be all the SMMEs which are in the space of tendering, or all SMMEs which are in the space of what the municipal-owned entities are likely to deliver when they deliver services.
Yeah.
We identify the co-ops in those particular areas. Then we empower them, not in the sense of the CSI, but we are piggybacking on what they are currently doing. For an example, you find a youth that is thinking green, the green economy, looking into vacant spaces, which we've turned as a society, we've turned them into dumping spaces, right? We go into those youth which are cleaning those spaces, and we introduce a program that is called separation at source. So where they would, the waste that will come out of that dumping area, first they will turn the dumping area into a park, right? And then they will separate the source. We give them the bins which will separate that source. And then they recycle and resell and generate income. But with the intervention of government, with the intervention, the capital injection that will come to those programs. So what is more important, the councillor spoke about foreign nationals which are infiltrating our space. We need to take it more onto a grassroots. We take the conversation more onto the grassroots because these are the lived experiences of a black child in those particular communities.
Yeah.
So we are regulating as government. From the planning department, we are regulators. So we have proposed a bylaw that is mainly speaking to the spaza shop space, where the regulatory body will assist us on what criteria should we use to eliminate those who are not best suitable to operate in our spaces. So most of our foreign nationals, maybe they don't have an ID, they benefit from our services,
Yeah.
such as water, electricity. They do not pay tax. So we are introducing a city tax, which is for you to operate a spaza shop, you need to pay something. Maybe the bylaw is suggesting that maybe annually or quarterly or a month, let's say hypothetically you pay 500 rands,
Yeah.
right? But you need to have an ID to operate a spaza shop in the township. So if we bring those legal frameworks in our communities, we are going to eliminate most of our foreign national spaza shops, and then we are going to create space for our own indigenous brothers to operate into those spaces. And we need to also think, because COVID also taught us, came as a blessing, as much as we have casualties in the process. We need to think, we need to be futuristic. When you walk into McDonald's today, you are not buying your burger over the counter anymore, but there's a digital screen where you place an order, and then immediately the system will give you whatever order that you placed. It's future that we are going into. We need to think for but we bring it on the grassroots. So when you plan a city, when you plan a power infrastructure, it has to be inclusive, not only roads, not only electricity servitude, but you also need to create a space where, when you're planning that the power infrastructure, you also bring the component of the fiber, the optic fiber, you also bring the component of the ICT into that space, so that when you bring a house, when you're going to build a house, it's the entire value system of development or developing the area.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks so much for that panel. Brother Justice, there was a mention around how we as different localities need to think about using the resources we have. And I think Dr. Muleko spoke about this, where Nakamudiri has its number of social grants that it pays on a monthly basis, right? That number, majority of it goes into food. The food that these community members are buying is produced by, your big companies. How are we as government, thinking in a very sophisticated manner to allow or build, mechanisms in place that whatever money we spend on these goods or on this retail needs is what we own or what we produce? How can we get government? Are you guys doing it? If you're not doing it, what are the gaps? What is difficult in saying, here's the 1 billion that we are spending on, or 500 million that we're spending on grants in our district? These grants are going into KOO, are going into into tin fish, they are going into frozen chicken. Where do these things come from? They come from these companies, right? Who's distributing, who's transporting them to our township or to our villages? Why can't we build them? Why can't we process them in our own townships? As government, as we put this regulation in place, what are the things that, as Nakamudiri, you are doing? Or if you're not doing, what are the gaps that are making it difficult for us to get there?
Oh, no, thanks, Octavius. In Nakamudiri, we are working together with different departments. In terms of supplying vegetables, meat, and everything, Department of Agriculture has established sites where people are trained. This center, big center, they call it Quora. It's a center where most of local people, local farmers are trained, and they are financed or funded. They are given equipment to plow their own products, and the arrangements that those products must find a way first and foremost on supermarkets in town and also find a way to township and in rural areas. That is not the only issue, but an agri-park. We call it Springbok Agri-Park. That's where, together with the Department of Rural Development, we identify farmers. It's a big part, there's a lot of money being channeled there. We are making sure that we assist farmers to market their products there, in terms of also skills development, in terms of human capital training, skilling them. That's the enterprises that we are using. So those are the two main enterprises in terms of this agriculture.
Yeah.
But generally, as MMC, former MMC has already alluded to, we are trying our level best to, really we must find, it must be very difficult for foreigners to operate in this thing, because that's where our challenges are. I think the issue of using South African IDs, compliance, and issue of also using permits, it's very key. We are trying to zoom in that area. But what is very key is the issue of human capital. Training our people how they can focus and develop their entrepreneurial skills. And also the issue of funding. As a district, we have been really coordinating, working with departments, even ourselves as a district, we have been registering cooperatives, finding a way of assisting them, really giving money to register, also to finance them, and working with other departments just to make sure that the equipment that they need, in terms of maybe cooking and so on. So those are the things that we have been working as an Agam. But really, as the old councillor was saying, you know, that's why when I really have to confirm coming here. Because when we said about individuals, people are just raising the issue of basic services, water, electricity, and roads. It's high time really we need to start campaigning rigorously and intensively in terms of local economic development. That I think it's a call for us. Just to change the mindset of our communities, because they prefer to ask, they don't want to contribute. So this really, I'm happy really to be here. So as Nakamudri Mulema, we are responsible for coordinating. I mean, last month, we even called the minister, we called, I think plus or minus 7 mines that are operating around, it's cement mines, that are operating around Nakamudri Mulema, but Harmony Gold mine. We coordinated, we called the office of the minister. Minister Dr. Mantash was there in Nakamudri himself. We called all those mines. Because we have been trying to call them, but they will send junior managers. We call and insist that we need senior managers, like who are holding key positions, who are making decisions within those mines. They were there, and we also called our business people, our entrepreneurs, to come and really force these mines to start casting so that we must be able to contribute as within, I mean, our people have in township and in rural areas.
Yeah.
Yes, I think.
Great. Bro Justice, I think that's really a mouthful. I wonder then, at a practical level, Councillor Mdegazi, we've spoken about how the communities need to, change their mindset. They participate in this process so that they can own and have a say in the development that takes place in their township. How do we change the mindset? How do we ensure that when a mine like a Bechekas Mall, a mall like a Bechekas Mall, before it gets to be built, that local entrepreneurs understand the importance of participating in the process so that When we start building the mall, we don't come back and say, but we gave the development rights to this company and we are not involving local entrepreneurs or local small businesses. How do we help the small businesses and the local entrepreneurs to change the mindset so that it's no longer about the basic services? Must we address, does it mean that we have to firstly address the basic services so that people can now entertain other secondary or tertiary issues? Because the primary issue is the food. You are hungry, so you want a job. You want to get a job, so you can't discuss anything that is going to, be a little bit more complicated. So you want to firstly make sure you are full. You've got electricity, you've got clean water, you've got a house where you live, and then you can start discussing, how do we own a mall? How do we own a KFC? How do we own a McDonald's? But how do we change that mindset? How do we change that mindset?
Thank you, sir. I think the entry thing in each and every one is a councillor's office. I think the councillor should make it aware so that it can make the community to be aware. And then the government should force those people who are developers to call a public meeting so that it can be a public participation. Everybody should be participate and understand what is going on.
Yeah.
And then we should choose or maybe appoint or elect the people who will be part and parcel of that development.
Yeah.
So that the people, they can feel that they get the ownership of the process. But most of the time, we just hear it. Those processes, they are there, but we don't implement it.
Don't implement.
The problem is in implementation. But if ever the developer, they can force to go to the people through the council, MMCs, ward committees, even the political parties that are around them, then I think the ownership of the people is going to be at hand.
Yeah.
So I can think about a year in Plaza, yes, in Plaza. If ever we can ask how many people around Tembisa owning the shop there, I think it's zero.
Yeah.
I never hear it. How many people who are owning security there? I think maybe it's 2%. I don't know. Because when you go, like myself, I'm going there, I say, no, you are not belong to this one. But this is a Tembisian area. It should be the people of Tembisa to be involved, not only one word.
Yeah.
Yes. That's the problem we have. Maybe we even ourselves, our mindset, we take it, if ever that thing is in my words, I'm owning it.
Yeah.
Then the other people, they won't get it. But whereas they are going there and buy it. You see? But if we can take all the people around that vicinity, then to be involved, we can go forward. But if ever we exclude some people and then we take the foreigners, they come in, they own, then the people of that society, they feel excluded from the business.
Yeah.
So this is what I think if we can work it like that.
Yeah.
It should be working in position. Yes.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Mdegazi. I want to quickly wrap up the session with my panel. We've neared the end. I think we've labored the point. Is becoming again a lot more clearer. What are the specific interventions that needs to be made? What are the specific mechanisms that need to be placed in place to be put in place? I want to then ask my panel just parting shots, but again, I want to ask that you locate or you prioritize, really talking about the next steps. So what do we go and do after this Imbizo? When we go back, wherever we are going in our different capacity or organizations, what do we do? What commitments are we making for us to make this thing a progressive discussion so that we don't come back again here and talk about the same thing a year later? What are we doing tomorrow? What are we doing on Monday? What are we doing next week? what are we doing as we get out of here? We can start with anyone from the panel, and I'll join from my online panel.
Thank you very much. As myself as a sister who is connected virtual, has alluded to us being, or rather us having an appetite to regulate, right? That's the first point. When you regulate, you are putting policies or you are putting a legal framework on how do you want to drive your discussion or drive the narrative on an inclusive participation. Other than that, if we are unable to regulate as government, that's where the problem will, because it's creating a vacuum. Let me create a scenario. You will sit down with a developer, right, in a meeting, white developers who have made billions in our country, and you ask them about how do they include participation of SMEs, right? Apologies. So they'll tell you, correct, no, we have empowered a lot of business people, for argument's sake. How did you empower a lot of business people? And they'll tell you, correct, we have property within the city, Renali block of flats in the inner city of Johannesburg. So we have sold some of our properties to black-owned companies, so that those black-owned companies can create value from those properties, right, and generate revenue. Well and done, it's a good initiative, and maybe the intent is good.
Yeah.
But you must also understand that on whose interest are you developing that black person, right? Because you are alleging or claiming that you developed a person who has got a block of flats. How much is a block of flats? Let's say it's 11 million. What have you developed on a person who came to you and gave you 11 million rand as a black man? As a black man. Right. So the narrative that they are perpetuating is not for the best interest of our local economy or the empowerment of a local black person, but it's for the best interest of their focus and the revenue. Why can't you go to Tembisa, identify somebody on the street, grassroots, right? We must always advocate for grassroots. Empower them. From the CSI point of view, buy them a house within the area. If there's a university also, you teach them, you train them, you incubate. Or you can buy this house, I'm giving it to you as a 30% set aside for whichever model that you want to use from the CSI. So we are empowering you, we are giving you this vehicle so that you could be empowered. You don't just buy that house and give it to them. You take their hand and say, when you want to operate into a property space, this is how we're going to do it, right? You empower them, you bring students in, you show them the model of the business, and then as soon as you think that they are relatively independent to can run their own business, then you hand over to them. So it's like, that's a proper way of incubating, right? So not only as politicians, we need to be as robust as possible. When we engage in big companies, you know, we shouldn't shy away from the realities on the ground. We should also, because we are engaging the people, we're engaging the communities almost every day as councillors. So we should understand and represent. Remember, you are a proxy of your own community, because not everyone can go and represent issues of policy in council. But you have been deployed, you have been entrusted by your own community, but we trust Councillor Soren, so he is going to directly represent our issues. So this is the perception, and this is how we need to drive the narrative as councillors as well, to always remember that you are not there because but I am there because I am representing a couple of thousands of people
Yeah.
who are out there
Yeah.
waiting for me to deliver on issues.
Yeah.
Your scope shouldn't be limited on service delivery if there's water outage, if there's an electricity problem, but you need to also engage. You asked him, the councillor, a very good question for him. How do we empower if there's a veg acre mall that is coming? We also need to engage those developers if they are developers to say, over and above the mall itself, what are you leaving behind? It shouldn't be limited to construction space where when the mall is finished, then the mall is just a white elephant.
Yeah.
There's no sustainability for the SMEs to understand. How can they still benefit from the mall moving forward? That's a dialogue that we need to have going forward.
Fantastic, awesome.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you so much, former MC. All right. Thank you so much, Tapelo. Justice?
No, thanks. I think really it's a time we really need to account. From here, first and foremost, I've already mentioned that we've got some big projects, Agri Park from our side. We will have to be specific. What has transpired, how many people have been assisted, and we have to involve the big businesses. Like I've already said, last month we called the Minister of Mineral Energy, that they were in Luxembourg, in the Tsobota local municipality.
Yes.
And we called all the CEOs and we have given them tasks. Must tell us percentages in terms of transport, tracking, how many local people are involved, food, everything that involves distance, even from our side. This issue of 30% local, I think must be minimum. We must go for a higher distance because percentages in terms of consuming, in terms of procurement, because that's why we are going to address this issue of township economy.
Yeah.
Because if more percentage of procurement are going to township people, they're going to spend more money there. So those are the issues that we really need to focus on, making sure that we plan our situations around.
Yeah.
And also we must start the issue of sort of campaigns or within our communities. So that also, people mustn't be just can spotters, taking chances.
Yeah.
Yes, they must really be committed, focused, making sure that if we want to achieve, because human capital is key, it's our commitment, put more energies, put more time on the issue of entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
I think.
Thank you so much, Mayor. Mr. Mdegazi, Councillor, so what happens now? How do we go forward? How do we become better at rebuilding our township economies? What must we do? What involvement is the councillors going to now make? How are they going to bring the people, in the conversation? What are we going to do for us to be able to say, 5 years later, see, our economy now is in our hands. How are we going to solve for that?
Okay, let's say thanks to Shims because he started.
Yeah.
No matter it's a small number, I think we should go bigger now.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
not to this small place. So that it should be a bigger numbers.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
And I think we should talk about business now, not to talk about this past pipe.
Yeah. Yeah.
Our plaza is demolished. We should rebuild. So the people of Timbisa should be involved when we rebuild it, so that we can protect next time.
Yeah.
It should be just demolished so easy.
Yeah.
You see. We must not always talk. We must practice what we preach. Because most of the time, we put nice
Plans.
policies, but when we go to do implementation, it's another story.
It's a problem.
It's a problem.
Yeah.
Like the shops here. they are demolished. We talked several times with the municipalities. Then they promised us 10 million that are going to do it all over in the province came and take it over. Now we are stuck with this big elephant.
Elephant, yeah.
And the people, they want to open up the doors
Yeah,
and sell something, but we start.
yeah,
We cannot get it. And you'll find it, the people from outside, they just get it
Yeah.
and use it. They hijack it like in Captain Park, Dover.
Yeah.
So I think if ever we can practice what we teach,
yeah,
then we'll do justice in South Africa. Because we don't do justice, we just talk.
We just talk.
It's talk show.
yeah,
Yes, since 1996, when we talk about RDP, up
Yeah.
until now, I think the people who benefited are small. Those who are talking about ABE, small. So
Yeah.
that's why we said white monopoly capital and red capital is still the same. Because we don't see any difference.
no action.
So now we must swear
Yeah.
on the ground.
All right. Thank you so much, Councillor. I really appreciate that. Let me bring, do we still have my online? Yes, Mr. Mkhala, let me come to you very quickly on this point. You had mentioned that, we've got to own different sections of the entire value chain, right? There's a number of challenges, but what you have said it is important is ownership, right? And access to finance is a critical enabler for that ownership. Your closing remarks in how then you and the many other small businesses position yourself or actively pursue in addressing some of these challenges that you've outlined? Or are you saying that all these problems are problems that must be solved by everybody else and not small businesses, Mr. Mkhala? Closing remarks.
Thank you very much, Octavia. And I think to borrow from the words of Ndadelo Hosha, when he was talking about planning, he was talking about Rome is burning. Rome has burnt. Rome has burnt, and we now need to rebuild. So I think the recent looting and the recent looting has kind of given us an opportunity to rebuild, but we cannot build on the same basis. A lot of these retailers, a lot of these people are going to come in and they're going to want to rebuild on the same basis, and we're saying that we cannot do that. We need to build. We need to rethink how we're going to rebuild. From a spatial planning perspective, we need to also look at inclusive spatial planning. We're talking about big mega cities that are currently being developed. For example, the Lanseria, which the councillor spoke about earlier on. The question is, what we're saying, have the rights been issued with a bias towards Black participation? And when we talk about Black participation, we're talking about participation at an ownership level. We're saying that Blacks cannot be seen as labor, Blacks must be seen as owners. So even when we bring in businesses that are participating, we don't want Black laborers, we don't want Black managers, we want Black owners. So I think it's very important. It's very important to consider. And then another thing that we're looking at is this idea of a conservative policy posture. We definitely need to look at that. It can and it has been done before. And government just needs to stop being conservative in terms of how they develop their policies. And then on the funding, and then in terms of the funding, I was looking at we put together a submission on comments for the Gauteng Township Economic. I think it was an act that was being put together, and they spoke about a fund. Where in the creation of this fund, you're talking about training and enterprise development, and we're saying people who benefit from that are trainers. So you need to make sure that when you provide funding, that funding actually goes into tangible and feasible businesses, and it is very important to create business. And I think there is a very big onus on small businesses to actually become part of the solution. Thank you very much.
All right, awesome, fantastic. Thank you so much, Dr. Makaula. Dr. Muleko, let's close with you. You in your earlier remarks, you really outlined quite a lot of problems, and also offered some solutions that maybe worth considering, the lack of recapitalizing NEF, looking at social grants in creating those pockets of ownership in the value chain. You've spoken, and again in great detail, how do we localize the inputs in our communities as a way to really empower and build this township economy. Your opinion, your closing remarks, if I may ask, and really just also ask you to lament on what framework, what policy framework, or what regulatory framework should then exist to enable all that which you speak about, which are great concepts that we should consider going forward. And I'm asking this because we also have the advantage of having councillors. We've got also, the district mayors and many other government leaders in the audience that are listening. What policy and governance frameworks should be put in place, ideally, to drive all these propositions that you've put forward in your closing remarks? Dr.
Thank you so much. I think the first thing, we've got to be very unapologetic about transforming the value chain. We've got to be very clear that we are decisively wanting to include Black-owned business in the value chain, and we've got to be very clear on the onset in terms of this outcome. I think also to be more strategic about some of the linkages between our rural markets, our urban markets. Primarily, I think I didn't focus on it right at the beginning, but if we are going to transform economic outcomes, and I think it touches on the last question that you asked me, we've got to accept that the spatial patterns and the competitiveness of rural versus urban is somewhat different. There is a land issue that is a primary property of the rural economies. For an example, the Eastern Cape, Limpopo, possibly Northern Cape and Mpumalanga. These are some of the regions that have massive land that can be utilized at a primary level, but you focus then on sourcing some of these inputs into your processing or industrial activities in your more urban nodes, primarily those that are closer to the industrial base. So we've got to have a way where we synchronize and synergize some of our inputs from the rural markets, which would produce en masse some of these inputs that we need for the subsectors, but we give them a market within the industrial processes. So I think to touch on some of the questions that you're asking, what can we do? And adding them to the closing remarks, let's set targets. I'm talking to the MMCs that are there, the MECs that are there. What targets have they set that contribute to manufacturing as a proportion of GDP, that contribute to agri-processing as a proportion of the manufacturing subset, chemical sector as well? What targets have been set at a local level? What targets have been set to promote high-value goods and processing of these agricultural goods by each region and even nationally? So what we've seen overall in South Africa is the deindustrialization of our industrial park sector, despite the incentives by DTI over the last 25 years, and also the agri and the land reform incentives, subsidies, and cash transfers. We have not seen a doubling or even an increase of our manufacturing value add, even our processing. What we have seen is deindustrialization. So quite clearly, we are not generating sufficient impetus and opportunities to grow the existing subsectors. So it's very important that, number one, let's set targets. We've got to know what are our regional targets as manufacturing value add is doubled. What you see in newly industrialized countries, Korea's, Singapore, Taiwan, and some of the smaller industrialized economies in the Asian parts is that they were very clear. Let's double manufacturing value add as a proportion to GDP. What is our target as South Africa? I would say let's put nothing less than that, because these are also your labor absorptive sectors. So they will help us deal with the triple problem of unemployment, which leads to poverty and inequality. So if you can focus and have targets that are dealing with your manufacturing as a proportion of GDP across your retail, across your agri-processing, across some of your high value added goods, this will help us deal with also the problem of unemployment. I think the second thing we've got to then, once we set targets, once we say that these at a local level are our targets to increase agri-industry, to increase industrial production, we then mobilize finance and capital towards these products. We also make sure that we enable entrepreneurs to know more about entry into these products, but also the capital generation and the Tibet sector, the artisans, those who are builders within these subsectors are mobilized with the finance, because you need the skills base as well, or the workforce within the manufacturing and primary sector to help grow these sectors. The policy imperative, the regional production requires clear partnerships. We talk a lot about intra-African trade. Let's start with intra-regional trade, right? Let's start with how much of our hubs that will later be developed in KwaZulu-Natal, in Gauteng, and currently the other areas in the country will source, for an example, basic maize from something like the Eastern Cape, sugar from KwaZulu-Natal and some of the regions. These are currently controlled by oligopolies. Many of you would cite, for an example, Hewlett's Sugar being one of the primary manufacturers of sugar as a component. How many local industries where we know that the humidity, the climate is able to generate those goods and services within the KZN space are actually owned by local businessmen who have small factories, micro factories employing up to 50 people, 10 to 50 people. We don't always have to look at macro, i.e. big companies. So the policy misalignment has got to look at the downstream production activities in the subsectors once you set these targets. Every region has a product or two, couple of products you've got to look at each region that has a different value add where you would strengthen the downstream activities within these. I think the other comment on the policy space is that the industrial funding framework begins to be critical. So you've got at a regional level, some of these financing tools. So you've got, for an example, in Mpumalanga, you'd have a development agency. You've got a Free State, a development agency, and a financing arm. You've got Itala Finance and other financing arms within the provinces. Are they speaking to these targets, right? Are they speaking to this drive of not negotiating whether we want to manufacture and we want to industrialize? We've got to all agree to this, and then we coordinate all of our instruments regionally and nationally towards these targets and improve the capacity of the state. We know that at a local level, the bylaws may not be enforced to the extent that they can. The laws that enable this are not necessarily being enforced. And we've got to say to the local MMCs, to the local counterparts, please work on making sure that your arm is efficient. And I think that accountability that has been spoken about is where we are not necessarily seeing it, primarily in the more rural and less urban areas. And I think this is where we will actually begin to see impetus. I think the last point that I want to make is this. We can do this as South Africa. We've got hundreds of billions in the prison system, in the hospitals, in the education departments, in various subsectors who are sourcing goods, who are sourcing products, not necessarily from local industries. There are industries that can be created, whether it's textiles, wood and wood products, chemicals. These still hold significant opportunities that can be leveraged just from the public procurement purse alone. But we've got to manage it from a way where we say that there is proper accountability, proper resourcing and financing and transparency in how these are dispersed. The governance is critical. When I talk about governance, and I'm talking about the transfer of funds, and you're talking about the procurement, where this is not something that because there have been problems, we should run away from. The problem of the unemployed Afrikaners in the 60s, in the 70s, and the 80s was primarily resolved through the use of state-owned enterprises. And unfortunately, if as South Africans, we take the position that says we cannot enter into state entities because they are not managed well, we cannot use the state arm because it has been misused, we will be missing an opportunity to rectify market failures that the market, through the labor market failures and others, are not able to resolve. So we've got to look at how do we fix the problems of state-owned enterprises to help us with the problems that we have as a country. And these talk to inequality, these talk to the provisions of who has access to most of these subsectors and historical anomalies. But I think it's critical for us to fix the state arm, to fix our state-owned enterprises so they can help us to meet this issue of being unapologetically transformative in our value chains and including Black-owned business in the economy to a great extent. I think I'll stop there.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Dr. Ntabiseng Moleko. Well, colleagues, that's it. I want to really thank my panel for indulging us on this conversation. Justice Mukulumakwa, the District Mayor of Ngakamudiri Mulema. I want to also thank Tolo Mukaula, President of South African Institute of Black Property Practitioners, as well as Councillor Tapelo Ahmad, former MMC for Economic Planning and Development at COJ, and Ward 11 Councillor Olani Mdegazi, as well as again, Dr. Ntabiseng Moleko. We unfortunately couldn't be joined by Tulani. So, colleagues, I want to thank you for indulging us on this session. It really was very important, and I think it's becoming clearer and clearer in the solutions and how the provincial or local government ought to respond in rebuilding the township economy. So, my job is done. My job is done. My job is done, and I'm only going to hand over to the president of ABSIP, Mepolo Leteke. Thank you.
No, thank you all very much, and I would like to release the gentleman. Councillor, thank you very much, Daddy, for hosting us in your ward. We really do appreciate it. What's about how you're moving? What am I doing? Camorana, the Camorana was about how the Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, what a treat! From the morning, with our keynote speaker, we have heard we've had really good input in terms of firstly really unpacking this very complex and layered issue that we are trying to find a solution to, and really zoning in on what the practical solutions are, and importantly, really being able to get out of some of our key stakeholders who are also key decision makers very clear commitments. So I'm excited that, as we've said right from the get-go, we don't want this to be a talk shop like the very many talk shops we have. We are clear that we've got policies, we are clear that we have got frameworks, and we've got all manner of plans. And what we are keen to get on with is the task of implementation. And I think today's purpose of engaging with what we refer to as the enablers of the solutions we started talking about last week, to a large extent was achieved. There are some really good nuggets that came out of some of the speakers today, which I would really just like to reflect on. I thought it was so important that Datele Hotla implored us that as we look for solutions, or rather the implementation of solutions, because we know the solutions, he reminded us that these solutions must be organic, right? So they must not be artificial in any way, and they must not also be coming from anywhere or parachuted from anywhere. They have to be indigenous. And it reminded me that traditional African systems have always been very effective in traditional African settings. And the reality is that we are in Africa, and we've got African solutions, and we therefore need indigenous solutions. And I implore us to not be forgetful of that as we move forward in terms of finding the appropriate interventions that need to be put in place. I was also very pleased that the MEC from the Gauteng province, when put, when taken to task, he actually made a very firm commitment about the specific things. He firstly outlined, some of the programs that they were already implementing. I was quite impressed by, the evolution in their thinking, in their realization that there's an importance for partnerships, so public-private partnerships in order, and the acknowledgement that government is there to set the legislative framework and an enabling framework for business, and is a policy maker and by no means an implementer. And I think that acknowledgement by government is very, very important, because it means that it opens up the opportunity for us as the private sector to come in and say, how do we help you using our technical capability, skills, and agility and nimbleness, actually, to reach a quick solution to some of the problems that we are trying to get solutions for. So I think that's very, very encouraging. And in fact, when he left this place that we are at today, Shimza, I must also do some marketing here. The hangout, so it's not Shimza, it's the hangout owned by DJ Shimza. When he left with his team, he actually made it a point that we set a meeting up already for Monday to talk about exactly how we're going to partner as ABSIP and his department and bring, the database of people that we have as ABSIP to the fore, so that we can work through these partnerships, or rather this network, which is a network of partnerships that we've been building over the years and will continue doing so. So that's really very encouraging and exciting. I think a key theme that keeps coming out, both from last week and this week, is the question around coordination. It has been proven time and again that when we work together as a collective, we actually are able to come up with very dynamic and innovative responses, in my view, to some of the solutions that, or rather some of the challenges that we face on a day-to-day basis. So last week, there was a lot of emphasis on community and the importance of community involvement, coordination amongst community members. And today, Dr. Mliko also emphasized the importance of coordination amongst the various government institutions, stakeholders, and layers of government. So I think that if that theme for me sounds like it's going to be a continuing theme throughout these Imbizos as we engage with other stakeholders, like I announced earlier this morning. I think, again, another theme that has recurred and very much more strongly today. Last week it was a strong theme, but I think today it was very clearly articulated and with a bit more, I would say, energy perhaps than last week. The importance of us really breaking down the whole value chain, particularly in the FMCG sector and various other sectors of the economy, that some of which were already referred to here. The importance of breaking down those value chains and being very intentional about identifying areas and opportunities where black business can actually be mainstreamed, and in particular businesses in the townships, and the importance of making sure that even where there's new infrastructure investment in the township, whether it's through malls or any other build, we again are intentional about ensuring that the local community entrepreneurs are part of that whole value chain. And these are the discussions we're going to be having with the MEC and his team on Monday. He was also quite excited when he heard a proposal from ABSIP where we said, if government is serious about 4IR, government has been talking about 4IR for some time now. They came up with a policy document and a paper, which we are all supposed to be working within and towards achieving. And I said to him, but why are there no digital technology skills centers across every township in South Africa if you're serious about 4IR? And he immediately said, we have to talk about how we bring that to life. So these are some of the hopefully tangible takeaways from today's session. As I said, we will be very intentional about getting very clear commitments and marching orders from every session, and ensure that we carry out the mandate that we are given at each Imbizo, and so that we can be called to account, by the way, by our membership. So thank you all very much for attending on social media, and we see some of the community members here from Tembisa have also joined us. Thank you very much for hosting us in your beautiful township, and we look forward to you hosting us for other events as well in the future. I must once again thank Telkom for being generous enough to enable us to live stream this for free on our ABSIP website for people that are on the telecom network. They were able to get access to the live stream for free, and we are in the process of negotiating similar packages with the other MNOs, and hopefully with the next Imbizos, most if not all of the MNOs will be on board, so that we can make this freely accessible to everyone who has got access to a gadget like this. I want to thank DJ Shimza, sorry, keep forgetting, for hosting us at his wonderful venue. We will definitely come here to party next time, let our hair down, even though we don't have hair, and really get to engage with the community and bring money into the community, because that's another theme that came out last week, to say we need to make sure that the money circulates in the township. And of course, I want to thank his staff members for being very stellar hosts today. I want to thank again the ABSIP team that has been working tirelessly to put this event together, again on short notice, and I think a special thank you to all our panelists, some of whom we literally called yesterday morning and said, we think your opinion is very, very important. Please make sure that you're available. And they made themselves available, so we really do appreciate that. If I'm forgetting anyone, I must apologize. I don't want to say all protocols observed, because that's a little bit lazy, but thank you everybody that has played a role, small or big, in helping us get to where we are. We will be announcing our next Imbizo, and that one is probably going to be a very, very, not that today's wasn't exciting, but that one is really very important, because we will be talking to the owners of capital. We will be talking to the owners of the opportunities that our entrepreneurs are saying they're looking for. We'll be talking to corporate clients. We'll be talking to the Pick and Pays and the ShopRites and the Mr. Prices of this world, to ask, why is it that your peanut butter is not coming from Tembisa when somebody in Tembisa probably can make peanut butter? And how do we make sure that somebody from Tembisa starts becoming part of that supply chain? And equally, we will also be talking to people who own malls in the townships, to say, why is it that you have got only majors in your mall and you're not doing anything proactively to ensure that you create space and you make it affordable and accessible for local entrepreneurs to also be part of these malls? So that's going to be quite exciting, but that will probably take place in about 2 weeks' time, and the team from the office will make an announcement at the right time. I would like to wish you all a wonderful rest of Saturday and rest of the weekend, and thank you once again for joining us this morning and now afternoon. Bye.
Waiting for the president.
I'm going to stand in the middle.
How are you, President?
Okay, can I get one without the mask?
Bring it down.
Thank you. Mask back on.